The silver didn't sound like much when he held it. It sounded like thunder when it hit the stone. 30 coins bounced and spun across the temple floor, ringing into corners, while priests in lined robes looked down as if the noise were a nuisance. Judas's voice cracked in the echoing chamber. "I have sinned. I betrayed innocent blood." They didn't argue. They didn't comfort. "What is that to us? See to it yourself." The money he had wanted now lay scattered at their feet. Judas turned from the cold faces, pushed through the doorway, and stepped back into the crowded mourning of Jerusalem. This began long before the money on the floor, with a man close enough to Jesus to be trusted with the group's purse. Judas Iscariot walked the same roads as the other 11, listened to the same teaching, watched the sick stand and the blind see. In the week of Passover, the city swelled with pilgrims. The chief priests and elders watched Jesus draw crowds and feared unrest, and with unrest would come Rome. They were hunting a quiet arrest, away from the people, without a riot. Judas offered what they needed, a time and a place. Matthew records the price, 30 pieces of silver. It was not a fortune. It matched the legal payment for a slave's death in Exodus. In the upper room at supper, Jesus said one of the 12 would betray him. Each man asked, "Is it I?" Judas said, "Is it I, Rabbi?" And Jesus answered, "You have said so." They sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. In a grove called Gethsemane, where oil presses lined the hill, Jesus prayed, while his closest friends struggled to stay awake. Judas arrived with a crowd sent by the chief priests and elders, lanterns, clubs, and swords cutting through the dark. He walked straight to Jesus and greeted him with a kiss, the signal he had arranged. "Friend, do what you came for," Jesus said. Hands gripped his arms. A disciple drew a sword and cut off a servant's ear. Jesus stopped the fight, told them to put the weapon away, spoke of scriptures that had to be fulfilled, and allowed himself to be led away. The rest ran into the night. Peter followed at a distance to the high priest's courtyard and warmed his hands by a charcoal fire. The council met through the dark hours, sorting witnesses and trying to frame a charge. Before dawn, the high priest questioned Jesus under oath. By morning, the elders had the judgment they wanted. They declared him guilty of blasphemy and delivered him to the Roman governor, because only Rome could execute. As the case moved toward the sentence everyone in that chamber understood, Judas watched what he had set in motion reach a point where it would not stop. Remorse cut through whatever had driven him to the priest's door. He went back to the temple with the silver and said what no one in that hall wanted to hear. "I have sinned. I betrayed innocent blood." They answered without hesitation, "What is that to us? See to it yourself." He had been useful at night in a garden. By morning he was disposable. They would not take the coins back, though they had counted them out. They would not claim any share in the guilt he confessed. Judas hurled the money into the temple, the clatter carrying down the pavement, and left. Alone, he went out and hanged himself. That is Matthew's account, spare, direct, and final. The money he abandoned could not be returned to the treasury. Even the priests who had paid it now judged it unclean. They used it to buy a potter's field as a burial place for strangers, people without family plots in the city. From then on, the site was known as the Field of Blood, a name that marked both the source of the money and the end that money helped buy. A bag of silver turned into a patch of ground anyone could find. Matthew frames that decision as the completion of prophetic words. He names Jeremiah, though the lines echo the scene in Zechariah where 30 pieces of silver are weighed out and thrown into the house of the Lord to the potter. The point stands. The price of betrayal went back to the temple and was traded for ground. The transaction became a landmark you could point to on a walk outside the walls. The story closed a loop that began in a quiet negotiation and ended with a hillside used for burial. Another New Testament account preserves a different detail about Judas's end. Acts names the place Akeldama, Aramaic for field of blood, and links the name to Judas's death when he fell headlong and burst open. Readers have long set the two reports side by side, a hanging and a fall, the same field, the same stain. The simplest way to hold them both is to see them as different angles on the same conclusion. Judas died violently. The field kept the name. The early church remembered both the money and the body when it told the story. Those hours between the arrest and the morning council are the hinge of the passion. Peter denied knowing Jesus and broke down weeping. The council pushed the case to Pilate. Crowds would soon be stirred to demand crucifixion. Judas stood apart from all that and faced the weight of what he had done. There is remorse in Matthew's telling. He confessed and tried to return the price, but there is no account of him seeking the man he had betrayed for forgiveness. He chose death instead of returning to the table he had left. The priest's decision about the coins shows the posture of the system that used him. They would not touch the money once it smelled like blood. They would not take responsibility for the man who made their plan possible. They looked for a lawful solution that would also seal the story with a name. A cemetery for foreigners sounded orderly. It also fixed a public label on the transaction for anyone who asked about it later. Walk by the field, and the answer was already in the name people used for it. Judas's name has since stood as a byword for traitor. It also stands as a warning about proximity without loyalty. He walked the same roads as the other 11. He heard the same teaching. He saw the sick healed and the dead raised. He held the group's purse and still sold his teacher for a sum that fit in a small bag. When the consequences came into full light, he knew what he had done and said so. That truth did not save him. He carried it into a field and ended his life under a tree. The gospel keeps the camera on the chain of events. The elders conferred. They sent Jesus to Pilate. Judas confessed and threw the money away. The priests bought a potter's field. The name stuck. Scripture does not dwell on motives or offer excuses. It leaves a map of choices and results. If anyone looked for what 30 pieces of silver could buy, the answer was simple. A burial ground for people with no other place to lie, paid for with the wage of betrayal. The field itself became part of the city's memory. Pilgrims learned the name when they came for feasts. Travelers repeated the story, using words short enough to hold. A disciple sold his master, tried to undo it, died alone, and left behind a plot of ground that spelled out the price. The account does not clean up the edges. It does not soften the end. It asks the listener to keep both the confession and the rope in view, and to understand that the distance between them is measured in a single morning. The coins Judas threw did not vanish into records. They did what money does. They made something lasting and left a marker you could stand beside. They also did what betrayal does. They kept speaking once the betrayer fell silent. The account is simple enough for a child to retell and hard enough for any honest heart to sit with. A trusted disciple sold out his teacher. He faced the truth of it, and without hope, he chose death. The field bought with his pay kept its name. The Gospels kept his memory, not to flatter the 12, but to warn anyone who hears the story and thinks they are too close to fail. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.